Terminó de hablar. Sara reunión Zoom.
¿Está señorita Monk?
Pero dile que no podemos.
¿Aquí está señorita Monk? Wait.
Mijo, no le estés cambiando. Su micrófono está silenciado.
Emily, ¿quién es Emily?
No sé. Conectar con el audio.
¿Quién es ellos? ¿Quién es Emily? ¿Quién es conectado con el audio? ¿Quién es Nancy? ¿Quién es Alu? ¿Quién es Luisa?
Mijo, espérate.
Ellos no son de mi escuela. Nadie se llama así. Nadie de mi clase
Entonces
se
no
llama
estamos
así.
en lo correcto.
Miriam, este es solamente una meeting del town hall. No es de la escuela. Bueno, es de todo el condado, pero todas las escuelas nos invitan para que escuchemos y participemos.
Ay, entonces yo estoy equivocada, pues.
No sé si tengas conferencias usted o qué onda.
Sí, conferencias, pero no me puedo conectar.
Le tuvieron que mandar un email con el Zoom link de su maestra, de su niño.
Ah, ok, muchas gracias. ¿Con quién hablo?
Nancy.
Ay, gracias, Nancy, muy amable, ¿eh?
No, de nada.
Hey, gracias. A ver, mijo, aquí no es, salte. A mí no me mandaron ese correo. Salte.
I just don't know. See, isn't it? Would love to hear your story.
Mute your microphone.
Welcome Welcome to the virtual town hall tonight. We appreciate you all being here. Thank you. So tonight we'll be talking about the Return to Learn Level Orange. And my name is Mickey Grebitz, and I am honored to serve as the moderator this evening. So if everyone could keep their mics muted and their cameras turned off so we could all focus on the presenters this evening, that would be great. Next slide, Mary Kay, that would be great. So tonight's discussion will focus on the updated information about the COVID-19 dial, local public health guidance and data, as well as the implications for schools. This town hall is scheduled for 1 hour. So we know you have many questions, and we'll do our best to try to answer as many as we can during this 1 hour. If your question is not answered this evening, we're collecting all questions and we'll be answering them in a frequently asked questions document, which will be posted on the town hall page on the district website. So if you have any questions, please submit them in the chat to me, Mickey Grebitz. There also is a presentation in Spanish. So this evening we'll be hearing from Dr. Smith, our superintendent. We'll be hearing from Drew Adkins, our chief operations officer, and Mary Kay DeRay, our chief academic officer. And so let's get started with opening remarks from your superintendent, Dr. Marion Smith Jr.
All right, I appreciate that, Mickey. Thank you very much. And so thank you to everyone who is joining us tonight, taking an hour out of your time to hear some critically important information. But we wouldn't be the organization that we are that's focused on learning and teaching if we didn't create an opportunity to begin with a level of awareness. And so, as we know, November is Native American Heritage Month. And here in Summit County, we know that we are on the native land of our Southern Ute tribe and its people. And so want to acknowledge the land that we're on, as we continue our journey together. One of the Native American elder expressions that I've used before is the phrase, "Those who tell the stories rule the world." And so what we're going to be talking about today is, what is the story that we've been able to tell over the last 13 weeks that we've been in school, and what story do we want to tell moving forward, knowing that there are many unprecedented challenges that we're meeting head on, and how are we going to do that as a collective community? First thing that I wanted to do, next slide, please. I want to take the time to bring awareness that this week is American Education Week. And so what a year it is to be a part of public education, right? And so one of the things that I like to say is that our staff, they do the world's most important work, and that is creating the spaces and the conditions for all of our youth to thrive. And as we continue to work as a team to navigate the realities of what it means to learn, to teach, to lead, and to work during COVID-19, I've told staff that I recognize that there are not enough words to express how much I appreciate each and every member of our amazing staff. And so publicly, I want to say again, thank you, thank you, thank you. I see you. I recognize all that you have done over the past 13 weeks of this particular school year, and that we'll continue to do to meet the challenges of COVID-19 head on, so that we can continue to make a difference in the lives of our scholars and our families each day. Before I turn over my time so that we can hear from our Chief Operations Officer, Drew Adkins, and our Chief Operations Officer, Drew Adkins, and our Chief Academic Officer, Mary Kay DeRay, I want to share with you 4 top of mind things or items that have been a part of our discussions as we continue to reflect on the last 13 weeks of school. As we continue to work alongside staff, our scholars, and our families during these unprecedented times. And so number 1 is gratitude. And so as a school district, we are excited and happy to serve the educational and social emotional needs of all of our scholars. I personally remain grateful to each and every of our staff members for what they do each and every day. And so these are truly educational giants who continue to work tirelessly to deliver a high quality educational experience for all of our scholars that is anchored in safety and health. One example of that came to mind just recently is that this past Saturday evening at about 8 p.m., I was on a conference call and I received a text message from our transportation director. She was just alerting me that 2 of our buses with our football athletes were staging in Idaho Springs due to the road closures in Georgetown because of the snowy and icy conditions because of the snowstorm that we had that previous week. They were in a safe location. They were watching a movie on the bus monitors as transportation talked with the local police to see when the roads would be clear so that everyone could get back to their destination. About an hour and a half later, I received a follow-up call that said that everyone was back in the county and safe and sound. I share that with you because safety is 24/7 for us here at the school district. All of our discussions and all of our decisions that we make are about safety and health first. Number 2, that's top of mind for me, is the concept of partnership. And so as partners, we know that we've worked together during this incredibly trying time to keep each other and our scholars safe. And so the efforts in the schoolhouse with the many different mitigation strategies we've implemented, you'll hear a little bit more about those from our Chief Operations Officer, continues to allow us to implement our current learning models across all of our 9 buildings. So that is full remote, meaning 5 days a week online for those of our families that chose that option. Our elementary level, where we've been able to offer 4 days a week in person and 1 day a week online. And at our secondary schools, middle school and high school, offering a hybrid model of both in-person and online instruction. What I think is critically important here is to note that 75% of our school districts across the country have yet to welcome kids back into their schoolhouses since they shut down in March of 2020. I'll say that again, 75% of our school districts across the country have not had kids back in their schoolhouses since March of 2020. Here in Summit County, we've been able to do that over the last 13 weeks. Why? Because we've been able to focus on implementing a variety of mitigation strategies and really partnering with one another to ensure that our safety and health measures that we're implementing are really allowing for us to be able to do that. My third top of mind is a collective concern. And so despite all of our diligent efforts in the district, we know that the state and our county continues to experience a significant surge of COVID-19 cases, and our schools are feeling the impact directly. So we're going to continue to closely monitor COVID-19 data in our community, as well as those positive cases and the number of quarantines in our schools. But we're mindful that the recent uptick and the continued uptick of COVID cases threatens our ability to be able to maintain our current learning models. And so I remain deeply concerned about the safety, the health, and the welfare of our scholars and our staff. And you may have seen that in a letter that I sent out on Monday to staff, families, and community members talking specifically about this reality. One of the things that I'll add to that is I want to bring us back to July of 2020. I had just become your new superintendent. I had been on the job for maybe 2.5 weeks, maybe 3, and we held our very first virtual families town hall. During that time in early July, 2 things were very clear for me. Number 1, the overwhelming desire of our community to have in-person instruction. That was very loud and clear. And as I listened back to the recording of that very first town hall meeting, I expressed directly to our community, internally and externally, 4 words: I need your help. And I will continue to reiterate that here. In order for us as a school district to continue the amazing work that we've been able to do, offering 3 very different learning modalities across our schools, I need your help. We listened to the community. And as a school district, we implemented a return to learn plan that honored the overwhelming expressed desires of our community to provide as much online, or excuse me, in-person instruction as possible. And so what I'm going to be talking about and what you'll be hearing about is the data that we're looking at to underscore what it's taken for us to be able to provide that over the last 13 weeks, with an understanding that we have new public health guidance, a new COVID-19 dial as of yesterday, and now we're working as a school district team to make sense of what does this all mean for us in the midst of our continued work. And my fourth top of mind idea as we continue to reflect on the last 13 weeks is my request to all of you, internally and externally, our family and our community members. This is a continued request since July and the release of our Return to Learn plan. Once again, I need your help. And so as we think about embarking upon the Thanksgiving holiday, the winter months, our flu season, winter break, I urge all of us to either set or recommit to a few non-negotiables. And so that is implementing with fidelity the 6 commitments to containment communicated by our local public health. Again, I am asking our community, internally and externally, to continue to focus on public health vigilance when outside of our schoolhouses. And so I'm asking for you to please join us, join me, join the school district in these Herculean efforts to remain able to provide our current learning models in a safe and healthy space as we continue to navigate through COVID-19 and the community spread as we move forward. 3 final thoughts as we move forward to hearing from our Chief Operations Officer, Drew Atkins. Number 1, as a district, we're going to continue to use multiple sources of objective data to inform our discussions and our decision-making. And I want to be very clear, our decisions are anchored in what will be in the best interest to promote the safety and health of over 3,200 scholars and over 500 staff members. Number 2, and I will say this in a way that I do hope that it is received in the way that it is intent to be received. And it's not about agreement, but it's about clarity. And what I mean by that specifically is thinking about our core business as an organization. We are a learning and teaching organization with an emphasis on learning, academic learning, social emotional learning, being able to do that work with fidelity. As I think about our core business, we've been listening to our public health professionals, learning from science. What do we need to know about COVID-19 that we didn't know back in March? And modifying all of our learning and teaching practices to address all of the public health information. And now, after 13 weeks, we've been listening to our doctors of health, our public health professionals. Now I'm asking all of us to listen to the doctors of education. And so as a doctor of education, getting back to our core business of learning and teaching. And what is that going to take? And so I think about sustainability of what we've been able to do as a school district over the last 13 weeks, responding to the ever-changing demands of what we know about COVID-19. Never complaining, honoring what we said was going to be our commitment to our community that said we want a school district that offers as many days of in-person instruction as possible, knowing that would be a challenge, knowing that it still is a challenge for us with the ever-changing realities of the guidance that we're receiving around the implications for schools. Just to give you some numbers, just this week alone, 22% of our scholars are out of our school buildings due to some form of quarantine. Remember, quarantine doesn't necessarily connect to a COVID positive case. It is simply us following our public health guidance and following our due diligence and out of an abundance of caution to ensure that we're focusing on testing and contact tracing to ensure that we're creating the most viable and safe communities as possible. So 22% of our scholars are out due to quarantine. 16% of our staff are out due to quarantine. 80% of our quarantines in the past 2 weeks have been at the elementary school level, and about 58% of our quarantines overall are at our elementary level. So we're looking at this data to really focus on sustainability to be able to do our core business, and that is learning and teaching. And so with that, I say thank you once again to our staff, to our families, to our community members, everyone that's been vigilant and diligent in honoring those 6 commitments by public health, who are focusing on doing everything that they can to ensure that our schools remain open to provide as many days of in-person instruction as possible. But I also want to give a public recognition and shout out to our SSD staff, who for the past 13 weeks have been sacrificing so much in what has been an uncertain, unstable physical and psychological environment to meet this moment head on in its ever-changing realities to best serve our scholars. And the third and final piece that I want to share with you is because of the lessons that we learned from spring 2020 prior to my arrival as your superintendent, all the way up to November 2020, as a district, we stand in a space of readiness. And that is a space of readiness to provide continued effective learning and teaching in whatever learning modality that we're in. And we've seen that over the last 13 weeks, whether that's full remote, whether that is online, whether that is in person, or whether that is hybrid. And so I look forward to continued conversations as we navigate these uncharted, challenging territories together, but anchoring all of our discussions and decisions in objective data so that we can remain true to our core of our work as an educational organization, which is learning and teaching. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Mickey.
Wonderful. Thank you for those opening remarks, Dr. Smith. Next, I would like to introduce Drew Adkins, our Chief Operating Officer. And just a reminder to anybody, if you have any questions, please place those in the chat to me, and then we'll pose those to the panelists after the presentation. Thank you.
Good evening, Summit County. Thanks, Mickey. Thanks for setting the tone, Dr. Smith. Take a little walk down memory lane, absolutely establishing the tumultuous, uncharted territory that we are in today. And what is COVID-19. So the last time, as we've been doing these town halls and I take a little walk down memory lane, I want to also highlight the return to learn messaging that we were doing over the summer and into the fall as we prepared to set on this journey that was the 2021 school year. Again, none of us, we all knew coming into this, and we talked about the fact clearly that there would be ebbs and flows, stops and starts, that we would be prepared for implementing mitigation strategies, and absolutely prepared instructionally when we had to pivot. We've seen, some of you obviously have had different experiences as our parents, our stakeholders, the members of our learning communities, depending on where you were at what different times in the school year. The light has shone, the COVID light has shone on different schools at different times, but it really hasn't spared any schools as we've gone through this, nor has it spared Summit County, Colorado, or the nation at large. I want to echo the words that Dr. Smith said at the outset. We've accomplished 13 weeks of successful instruction, whether that's been in person, in a hybrid model, or in the remote situation. So commend all those staff members. Summit School District has absolutely done a wonderful job. We talked to our staff members last night, commended them for their hard work, and whether that's our teachers every day, virtually and in person, our building leaders who are implementing these plans, our support teams behind the scenes, whether that's driving buses or serving lunches, cleaning our schools, the tech that's been required, you name it, we've done it. The challenge that's come up, we've seen it. So I think what I wanted to highlight here in the first slide is what Dr. Smith was referencing, and that is the mitigation strategies. What's kept us moving for 13 weeks when we've seen other schools closing, when we've seen schools that haven't even opened yet. Again, as was noted, 75% of our nation's schools not even opening their doors to date. And I really, again, I commend all of our staff, support, instructional, leadership, you name it, to be able to do these things. And what we see is entered the schoolhouse up to the schoolhouse door is, we've had different entries and exits, many different entrances, depending on the school that your child attends, in a way to cohort, in a way to make schools within schools, in a way to make small learning environments, and really bubbles around kids while they're in school during the day, to eliminate transmission of the virus and spread within our educational, our instructional environments. PPE and masking, we really thank our emergency ops committee, our state, and certainly the philanthropy that we've seen in Summit County for helping outfit our students and staff with masks, cleaning supplies, et cetera, barriers. Anything really that we can do to create the supports needed to have successful transmission-free, virus-free days. Physical distancing has been imperative as we walk our halls and we look. School looks very different, and I'm sure your children have noted that. Deep Clean Wednesdays have been a point of pride for us, whether it's our own staff or partnering with community cleaning agencies. When we've seen the virus pop up in schools, we've been quick to act there, whether that's taking a pause or just making sure that we are able to get in there and clean those rooms. And kudos to our teachers too, who are certainly putting some elbow grease into those tables, chairs, and high touch surfaces. We've talked a lot in our last conversation about ventilation and the 3 layers of protection that we have for air quality. We refer to ASHRAE guidance, which is our HVAC guidance, and we've gone above and beyond. The first was we input 100% new air while the temperatures were warmer here in our mountain community. As things have gotten colder, we've relied on putting in MERV 13 filters. We said we were going to do that, and we spent about $70,000 trying to get that in the first round, and we're about complete with that. So that's wonderful in our upgrade of our filtration. And then finally, more recently, through wonderful partnerships and philanthropy, through Brett Grant Vacations, Summit Foundation, some of our towns, Frisco, Silverthorne, have all contributed to be able to put HEPA filters in our classrooms, primarily to support our kids. We've still got a few on the way at Summit Middle School and Snowy Peaks, but we will have those here in short order. So we feel fortunate to have those. We're thankful, and those are great mitigation strategies. We focused on vulnerable populations, whether that's bringing them in daily, through, again, focusing on that in-person prioritization of that in-person instruction, and with some of the PPE and air quality measures we've talked about. You've seen the pictures, and certainly as you drop your children off, the daily symptom screening at the door, temperatures, et cetera, again, to try to keep kids who are ill or asymptomatic away from the population at large and spreading the virus. We've had a wonderful COVID response team, really contact tracing. We've developed our own 4-person team that collaborates with public health. Big shout out and kudos to public health for their support of us throughout this pandemic and communicating with our families and putting in place the strategies and the flow charts and the algorithms that we've seen put in place by CDPHE. Curative testing is something very new, a new mitigation strategy at the middle school. Some of you may have found that you were able to get a test, a real PCR test, just like you see at some of the other sites at your schools. That's being piloted this week at other schools, and we hope to have that in effect at all schools here before much longer. So if you're a student or a staff member, you can get a quick test. They are not rapid tests, but a test that stands up certainly with the metrics that we are held accountable to. We have isolation rooms. Hopefully, many of you have not had to pick up a child who's symptomatic or ill, but if you have, hopefully that's been a quick, efficient way to get a child taken care of, supported, and then in a safe situation. We've had struggles with transportation limitation numbers. We know that we've had to cut down on our ability to put kids in buses by 50%. And that's been hard for us. And we realize that it's been hard for you. Daily and weekly, we monitor those routes and try to update them as we see the needs of our community members. We've really worked hard with public health on those return to school protocols when we have positivity, and supporting through isolating individuals and quarantining cohorts when we have those positive symptoms, positive tests, and or symptomatic individuals. And certainly the AB hybrids at the secondary level, more appropriate for the older levels, have worked well. And we're very proud of our scholars and the way that they've engaged on those online days, and even all students when we've had to pivot, when we've had to pause. So again, I just wanted to go through those mitigation strategies have been a heavy lift for SSD. We appreciate your flexibility and understanding as we've engaged in all of those. This was not our typical work, and last year, I think if you'd have told us we were doing these early on at this time, we'd have certainly been shocked. We've all had to put new hats on and learn new skills, and I know that's the same in Summit County with each of the businesses and responsibilities that our parents and stakeholders have. Next slide, please, Mickey. So this is a screen I just wanted to, again, remind us, as Dr. Smith said, yesterday, CDPHE released a new dial, and I know we've seen that in the paper. We certainly want to make sure that we note that we are transitioning and on the tail end of this dial, moving to a new color-coded dial with the addition of a purple. And I think most of us have read in the paper our move towards the red after a couple of weeks of high metrics. I know Amy Wineland is on the call as a parent and certainly as our public health director, and I really appreciate the fact that she'll be around for Q&A if we have some of those questions, especially surrounding the new dial. This presentation was prepared for the orange 3 level, and less than 24 hours ago, we certainly saw a pivot. We are used to those, and we will certainly align our metrics with that new dial, but we're going to speak to this one right now. I want to remind everybody that we overlaid our instructional planning and design to the CDPHE levels that we see here. Obviously, we aspire to that protect our neighbors level and really want to absolutely avoid anything that will be more restrictive for our schools or our community. And as you can see there, we are in a model as of a couple weeks ago, and currently even, we're still in this dial until the new one takes place for next week, where we're in the orange level 3 of in-person, hybrid, or remote as appropriate and as deemed appropriate by the school systems anyway in delivering instruction. Next slide, please. And again, this just reiterates that, and it's a focus on orange. A lot of folks, a lot of our stakeholders and parents have called or asked questions about group sports and where we are. That is a extremely complicated conversation. As you can see up in the right-hand corner there in the current dial, in the current model, group sports are virtual or outdoors less than 10. It's my understanding that that certainly is going to continue in the new dial. There's been some confusion around football, field hockey, and cheer, and we don't have field hockey certainly here in Summit, but those all had variances with via CHSA to the governor's office, so they are allowed to continue at this time. Public health order allows for the variances, so we're finishing up that football season, as Dr. Smith alluded to, and working with our partners in the governor's office, CHSA, and public health, trying to coordinate all messaging there. But I wanted to focus, that's been a question that we've had in our community and of our buildings. Next slide, please. This is one of the things I'm sure, Amy, again, this is the public health's slide from a few days ago, actually, on our positivity rates. And they've declined, actually, as of today. I just looked at the dial. We've dropped below that 15% at 13%. But for a while in the last couple of weeks, and really for the last 5 weeks or so, we've really looked at positivity rates climbing above 15%, closer to that 20%, 17, 18, depending on the day. And I know a lot of us are checking that dial. When we look at positivity rates, I just wanted to throw that out for the community perspective. Again, not a public health official, but I wanted to acknowledge where we are as a county and then overlay where we are as a school district with staff and students. So next slide, please, and I can focus on those matrices. So one of the things that we wanted to share today was, where are we? Dr. Smith shouted out some statistics earlier that we have had about since the beginning of this pandemic in Summit schools and our return to learn this year. We've had about approximately 94 positives in staff and students. I think one of the upticks that we saw in the previous slide that Dr. Smith acknowledged and that we all see in our community, and our move to more restrictive levels within public health, has been the fact that we've had about 94-ish positives. And like I said, 51%, as you can see on the chart there, have occurred since November 1st in the past 2 weeks. So really this is meant to be indicative and really to reflect and mirror what we're seeing in our community, what we're seeing as a country, what we're seeing in our state. And that's that folks, certainly that doesn't mean they're contracting it necessarily in our schools. Those mitigation strategies and factors are working by and large. But we are seeing it come into the schoolhouse. We are seeing it come into our learning communities, and more recently, really than ever within the last 2 weeks. Next slide, please. Testing. Again, I alluded to that at the outset, and really this slide was meant to show that we've really tried, and again, this is a public health slide. Kudos to public health for the 3 or 4 different areas. Some of you have probably really heeded the public health advice to go out and get tested, whether that's over at Silverthorne through CDPHE, Vail Resorts at 3rd and Granite, or right here at School Road with Centura. We appreciate those partnerships, and we appreciate our partnerships within the schools. Like I said, I won't be redundant, but we are hoping to get testing within the schools. That is happening in pilot fashion right now. Just like what we're seeing here with increased testing, we're hoping to contribute to the community at large and the opportunity to identify those asymptomatic and be able to protect our learning environments with yet another strategy. Next slide, please. This slide, some of us had some questions a couple of weeks ago. We were getting questions from staff and students about the 2-week cumulative incidence and 2-week average positivity. Again, this is from a few days ago. That is not 17% now. That is, I think, 13%. But we're really looking at, and one of the factors we look at as a school, just like all of you, is where are we as a community and where is that dial pinned? We were entering really week 5, and all of us are aware as Summit County residents and citizens that the first 3 weeks, 2 weeks, then a move of increased mitigation strategies. After that 3rd week, moving to level 3 orange, which prompted this conversation, and then entering our 2nd week, especially in the 2-week cumulative instances on the dial that is ending now into the new dial again of stay at home. And these are indicators. And as we know, that's not where we sit, but potentially where we're headed if we don't turn things around as a community. So wanted to point that out, wanted to let everybody know that we're watching that dial as well as in addition to our own metrics and statistics within the Summit School District learning communities. Next one, please, Mickey. This is a chart that, unfortunately, we're all too familiar with. Our contact tracing teams, I actually have it on the wall and a lot of these in front of me. A lot of you have been negatively affected by these return to learn algorithms. We realize that they absolutely, and we apologize, they're absolutely set up for school learning communities through CDPHE to help, again, keep our students and staff safe. These are mitigation strategies. When we moved a couple weeks ago into that orange 3, we moved to a more restrictive state, and that also made it tougher. It made it tougher for individuals who are symptomatic to, one, have to go get a test. That was the same in return 2. And that would bring back the individual if they were negative, and then also the cohort. This chart is really about the individual's return, whether that's a staff member or a student, to learning. And you can see that the addition was seeing a doctor and getting a explanation of symptoms and some sort of alternative diagnosis. And this has created, the reason I put that up here is when we talk about number of quarantines and positivity, next slide, please, Mickey. what we've seen is this is the following, this is the return to learn for the rest of the cohort. We've seen more quarantines of cohorts. I'm going to show you those statistics here in a second. But the box on the left, which is the red box, we've put this out in a lot of our communications weekly to folks, but these are the immediate quarantines. So if you're COVID positive, if you have any new symptoms and been in close contact, or if you have that loss of taste and smell, that's an immediate quarantine. We've had to do that more often than we'd like, but out of an abundance of caution, we've done it consistently and at a pretty high level here at in Summit Schools. Absolutely, again, with the trajectory that we've seen, we've had a pretty big uptick. One of the things that you see over on the right there in the gold box is, again, in Return to Learn 3, this has to happen within 4 days. This has been quite a challenge for our community, for our providers, for our parents. We realize that it's also provided a lot of back and forth that is not the continuity of learning that we really wanted to provide as we were at the outset. And we didn't see some of that at the outset of out for a couple of days, back and forth. Again, our families have done a wonderful job pivoting, understanding, being flexible. Our teachers, the leaders, and all of our support staff have absolutely adapted as needed. But I wanted to explain that flow chart and why. That's not always off of a positive. That's sometimes off of symptoms, and sometimes because we just can't get a doctor's appointment or a test. Next slide, please. So what does that mean for us statistically, and what's the data say, Drew? The data says that we've had 35% of all of quarantines in the last 2 weeks. So of the 13 weeks that we've been in session, 35% of those, and climbing, have been during the last 2 weeks. That's because of rising positivity in our community. And that's also because of positivity, certainly outbreaks, quarantines within the community. That's also because of that algorithm within Return 3 that is provided by CDPHE in order to keep us safe at higher levels. So we understand that, but that creates really more of a challenge and really starts to jeopardize some of that sustainability. Next slide, please. So really, where does this go? And then as we talk about big picture, what are we looking at as a district? And really what guides and our pivots, our closure when we move to something that is online versus in person, things like that. Well, on the left part of your screen there are the parameters that are identified by CDPHE, and those are very clear with schools. And we've seen some of these. So 5 or more outbreaks within a school. And this is a school of 3,500, like a Cherry Creek, or a small school like a Frisco or a Breck. And when we have some of those outbreaks, we have had outbreaks. We've had 5 outbreaks in Summit Schools, 3 of those academic, and all 3 of those at the elementary level. That we do pivot, and we do, and you've seen that we do those pauses of a couple weeks to let people get healthy, to keep those kids safe who are in the cohorts and staff. When we have 5% of staff out of who have COVID or really strong COVID symptoms or are deemed or probable, we've had that situation as well. We also pivot. And then obviously we've need some time to clean our schools, to gather data and allow public health and our own teams to contact trace. And because of a large number of staff absences, as Dr. Smith hit earlier, we absolutely are limping in some of our schools right now because of a lack of staff. We try to keep those going, but we've had to pivot in situations like at the high school. We had a large number of instances and then causing some quarantines and then really not being able to deliver that instruction in person as we had intended, and 2-week pause certainly is necessary. On the right, we're looking at what other internal metrics, and this was communicated via Dr. Smith on Monday in the letter. We are looking at that dial, and we have been looking at the previous dial, the tail end of the dial that we're in currently, and we've been looking at what is the cumulative instances that we've had in the average positivity. When are we as a community in a state when it will or could jeopardize the health and safety within our learning communities? Viral spread, that's another one. And do we have that happening within our schools? As I said at the outset, that was not something that we saw. We do pride ourselves in our mitigation strategies. Schools are safe. Have we seen spread within our schools? Absolutely. When you see those outbreaks that we've seen publicly, press released via joint communication between county and school district, like happened in Frisco, or Breck Elementary. Those are instances when we've had that spread. We're certainly looking into those even on daily basis, that even in days like today at some of our other schools. School pivots, we realize that childcare is a big thing in our community. And when we have a lot of schools pivoting to online in 2 or 3 elementaries, that would absolutely jeopardize the situation. And one of the things that our community asked us is to stay on the same page so that families can organize their lives, so that older siblings can take care of younger siblings, and there can be some continuity. We've tried to do that throughout this pandemic, and we will continue to do that when we pivot. And then quarantines and number of quarantines and what's sustainable and what absolutely provides, again, a consistent, great educational platform. And when we start to get closer to that 50%, whether that's staff or students in quarantine, out, sick, ill, for whatever reason, we start to question whether that is actually what we pledged to do at the outset and whether we were able to deliver on that promise. Anyway, these are some of the things that we're looking at. We want to be transparent. I thank you for the opportunity to reflect on operations. Again, huge kudos to the SSD staff for moving through and supporting our learners and families for 13 weeks. Have done a marvelous job. We absolutely want to commend them. We want to thank you as families for the flexibility you've had when we've had to pivot late at night, and we've thrown curveballs based on the data that we have. Anyway, I want to be able to pass this on and talk about the instruction. And I think Mickey, Mary Kay is up next. Is that correct?
Yes, great. Thank you so much, Drew. We really appreciate you going through all those operations pieces for us. Next is Mary Kay Doré, our Chief Academics Officer.
All right, I think I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Dr. Smith and Drew and Mickey. As Drew said, Learning Services, I'm Mary Kay from Learning Services, and we're the other half of the plan. On top of all the things that Drew talked about too, we've had our principals, our teachers, our support staff, all working on trying to make sure that we're ready from a Learning Services point of view. So as Drew talked about and Dr. Smith mentioned, since last spring when we were shut down, we've been working with principals and staff to be ready for all 3 models. Too bad we haven't hit the in-person model, but we know we've had staff working for in-person, for hybrid, and for online. We thank our staff and thank our parents again in the state of preparedness. I wanted to bring back a word that we talked about a lot last spring, was being nimble. We've had to be more nimble than I think any of us ever guessed, having to switch between things and be ready. I said to staff, next pandemic, we'll have a handbook and we'll know what to do. Right now, with not ever being through this before, we're trying the best we can to make sure that kids are still learning, teachers are still able to teach, and we're able to make sure that we're moving through this as well as we can. So I also want to share with parents and community right now a couple of things that we've done to get ready to support learning. So Kara, if you can flip to the next slide, please. So we talked a lot about the board meetings, a delayed start for this year, that teachers needed some extra time to plan and we needed some extra time for professional development. So right here, I just listed for everybody so you can see the different kind of professional development that we did during that delayed start when we delayed school for the first week. Talked about some mental health training, the distance learning playbook that all of our staff has for how they can really have that pedagogy for doing some online learning and making sure that we bolstered up those skills. We also knew that technology was going to be a big thing. So that's another piece that we knew that we had to help staff out with. And Kara, if you move to the next slide, we'll share a little bit of the tech that we purchased and that we've been training people. So if you listen to the board meetings before, we talked about MobileMind. It's a Google platform training that we've allowed all of our staff to have access to. As you can see here, we've had 27,000 micro courses finished. So we've been, or 2,700, sorry, courses finished by staff in just this first quarter alone. So we've also implemented and bought Seesaw and Dreambox. Seesaw is an online platform for elementary students, and Dreambox supports math at elementary as well. All teachers now in the district have access to Nearpod and News ELA. So those are different ways that we knew over the summer we wanted to do some extra technology to support instruction and support our teachers to be able to make sure that kids were getting the support they needed as we were moving forward with this often more online instruction. Kirk, if you can flip to the next one. So as I said before, we've been in the state of preparedness. As Drew talked about, we've had pauses for 2 weeks. We've had quarantines. We've talked to teachers about that they have to be ready to go at a moment's notice to be able to switch. We saw the high school do some great professional development, some problem solving after their 2-week pause of how high school staff could help better reach kids, how they could make that learning environment and those learning strategies better. We've seen schools survey parents, teachers, and students for their online experience and what things we can learn and make sure that we're doing better. And as Drew said, when we prepared and called these town halls, we were looking at level orange, and level orange has just made us try to be even more prepared that if we would go farther on the dial to just make sure that we were ready to any kind of switch to any different learning model. So right now, principals are looking at and trying to be prepared if there would be any switch, that we'd look at how could we support any of our special populations? Could we do any in-person support of students on IEPs, some of our non-English proficient students, or even students in preschool? So as Drew talked about, it's a complex puzzle with staffing, with people out on quarantines, education, all of those pieces. So our principals right now are wading through, trying to put those puzzle pieces together, see if there'd be a need to switch any learning model, and how could we continue to support those students who may need some more in-person support or intervention. Kara, next one. Thank you. And then we also know that a big thing that has been weighing on all of our minds is mental health. So big shout out to our counselors, school psychologists, Ellen Clark, Elizabeth Edgar, all those folks who work with our mental health support team. They've been working on some goals for if there would be any kind of switch. And for right now, what we're doing with students, we're trying to provide, as you see there in the first bullet, provide some in-person mental health support if it's safe. Support student engagement with schools, to foster opportunity for students to connect and reduce isolation. What are some of those tips and tricks that we can give to families? And support families and communities in ways in which they can support and increase that safety. We've seen our middle school staff and also our high school mental health staff. They're doing a virtual home visit training. So people keep trying to deepen their toolbox and make sure in this time that we've never been in before that we can help support our students and our staff with mental health and how we can help support them. We know, as Drew talked about, these 13 weeks that we've been in school has been immensely important for teachers and for students to make those relationships. We know that carries over to when they have those 2-week pauses or if they're in quarantine, that those kids already have that relationship with those teachers, and that only helps that switch in learning modality. So we just, again, thank everyone making these 13 weeks work and making our staff putting in the time and having those relationships, because we know that helps carry over to the success of our kids. So that's just a little update of what we've been doing on the other side of teaching and learning, and making sure that we're doing the important work that we always do in this new and challenging time and in some different ways. And I think, Mickey, I'm turning it over to Dr. Smith for some wrap-up comments.
Yeah, if we can go to the next slide. And yes, I would like to open it for Dr. Smith in next steps and closing remarks.
All right, thank you for that, Mary Kay, and thank you for that, Mickey. And so I'm physically exhaling right now for those of you that can't see it. That has been a wealth of information in the short amount of time that we've been together, but that has been the work that we've been focusing on collectively. The complexity of what this has looked like to navigate just public health and safety and understanding how to navigate COVID-19 with a focus on our core business, which is learning and teaching. And so where are we now? We're at a crossroads. So it's that so what, now what, here's what. And so here are our next steps. The first one is we're going to be reviewing and analyzing the recent COVID-19 dial, as we mentioned, that was released yesterday, reviewing some updated public health guidance data, and also reviewing all of the district metrics that Drew spoke about. We're going to continue with engaging in conversations. We have a board meeting tomorrow. All of you are invited to attend the board meeting. That's begins at 5 p.m. I should have these memorized by now. And listening to our Board of Education engage in a very similar conversation based on information that will be shared with them. And then lastly, what was communicated in my Monday communication to families, to staff, and to our larger community is that looking at all of this information, looking at the multiple data sources, so the qualitative, the quantitative, the perceptual, based on where we are right now with the new information and the guidance that we have, we'll be communicating additional information and any additional next steps to all of our community members no later than Monday of November 23rd. And so we appreciate the grace and space for us to review this new information and the new implications for a new dial just yesterday, and how that impacts the work that we're currently doing, how that's going to impact the work as we move forward. And the key concept that I focused on with staff is the concept of sustainability in being able to provide safety, being able to provide quality, effective instruction that focuses on the learning and teaching of our 3,200 scholars and supporting our over 500 staff. And so those are our next immediate steps as we move forward. And I go back to my very first time meeting most of you in a public setting virtually, which was our virtual town hall for families back in July of 2020. And once again, I stated 4 words directly, and I will reiterate these here. I need your help. Better yet, using that collective pronoun, we as a school district need your help to continue to provide the instruction in the different modalities that we've provided, the online instruction, the in-person instruction over the past 13 weeks. We need your help by following the 6th commitments of public health and being able to address, you've heard the 15 different mitigation strategies or more that we've implemented in our schoolhouses, and being able for you to honor those outside of the schoolhouse so that we can continue as a community to be able to provide the targeted learning and teaching that you asked for back in July. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, to Mickey, because we have time for questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Smith, and for those closing remarks. So we're going until about 6:30. So let's try to get through these questions as quickly as possible. We'll start with some operation questions for Drew Adkins. So someone had posed the question asking about what are the 3 layers of air cleansing? I think you hit 2 of those, but if you could just review all 3 for us.
Yeah, thanks for giving me an opportunity to go back to that. It's really important, I think, as we learn more about this disease and the aerosols. We were talking fomites really at the beginning, at the outset of this, at the outset in August, and touch surfaces and things like that. We've realized that there's a lot more of aerosols involved in the spread. So our HVAC has to be a top priority. So thanks for that question. Again, what we tried to do through our HVAC, we can raise or lower the level of new air that we bring into buildings. So we were at like 100% new air in the fall, which was wonderful, being turned over at a very rapid rate. And we can do that electronically. One of the things that the pitfall with that is, as it gets colder, as we've seen really in recent weeks, it brings the temperature of the room down. So that's a challenge for us in the mountain community as we get into winter months. So then we need to rely on that second layer, which is the MERV 13 filter. We had MERV 8s, and really the guidance from ASHRAE, which again oversees kind of all of our HVAC systems, is to go to a MERV 13. So where we could fit a MERV 13, we've been putting them in. They were tough to get. It took months to get them, but they're being installed as we speak, and are already installed in most of our buildings, which is wonderful. We'll have to do that again as we hit about March, and we'll do a second, and we'll replace those MERV 13s again. So awesome that we have that, not required, but certainly something we thought was important. We went even a level third level, another level deeper on our air purification, and we went to the room-based HEPA filters. So, and prioritized our classrooms. And again, I shouted out some community organizations that helped us with some of that through philanthropy and fundraising. And then we also use CARES Act dollars. Again, we're getting them into, I think the middle school and Snowy Peaks are going to be getting them here in the next week, but all the other schools have them in their classrooms and in areas where we have a high concentration. And those HEPA filters are really set up for anywhere from 500 to 1,200 square feet. So we have them running as well. Again, this is a top priority for us, and we thank everybody for their support of that.
Great, thank you, Drew. And one more question for you. This question is about the curative swab testing. What are the possibilities of either false negatives or retesting if negative? And then, oh, sorry. Let me unmute you real quick. Sorry about that. So yes, what about the curative swab testing? We know this is new in schools this week.
Yeah, thanks. The curative is it's a PCR gold test. So I'm new to the public health language as well. So that would be the same level of test, even though it's a cheek swab. It's not a rapid that you get back in 15 minutes. You have to send it off. We send it off FedEx, and then it comes back in 48 hours. And it would be the same level of authenticity or of fidelity as if you went to any of the other locations with the curative. Again, it's not a rapid, it's confusing because it is a cheek swab. And I'd probably defer to our public health experts on the level of false negatives that we received from some of those. I was on a call this morning with one of the rapids that we were thinking about using. It's called a Binax that you might hear that is available. And it had really a 60% false negative. So we were talking about using that for asymptomatic staff and things like that, but that doesn't give you much reliability. The reliability on the curative is certainly a much higher rate with asymptomatic individuals, and that's what we were talking about. And then we're using it for symptomatic individuals right now, our students before they leave, hopefully, school if they have symptoms or are sick, or our staff. And then hopefully we can get to a place where we can do drive-up type things and really take the load off of Summit County and also provide some supports. So we're really excited about that. I think it's a great, awesome benefit, and appreciate the partnership again of CDPHE and Care Clinic, SBHC, and Public Health with that.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Drew. Let's switch over to some teaching and learning questions for Mary Kay DeRay. Mary Kay, sorry about that. So there seems to be some lack of consistency among buildings with learning time while learning at home. Can you speak to that?
I sure can. That's been a great, as we went through first quarter, it's conversations we had with our principals at the secondary level and with the elementary level as to where we were at, what they were experiencing, how we could problem solve through some of those things, what were expectations that we could share for students and for teachers. We know we've lacked some consistency. It's something we've been working on, and really having that, what's the purpose of some of those at-home days. Secondary obviously has a different schedule than elementary, and that's purposeful because kids are obviously developmentally different at those different times. So that's something, Mickey, that our principals have been working with their staff and have been working through as we navigate these uncharted waters, how can we make sure that we're still trying to keep those student needs first and teaching and learning first, and making sure we're trying to provide things. It has been a challenge. We've done some things and have had to tweak and had to move along, but our principals are working really hard with their staff to make sure that we try to develop those consistent expectations, and they're clear for students and for parents. So those are lots of conversations we've been having in the last few weeks.
Wonderful, great, thank you so much. And another question here is, so for students who are learning online at home, they're seeing that their child is not on their computer or online all day. Can you speak to students maybe not seeming like they're learning all day while they're at home?
So not being online all day. I think that's what maybe what that question meant. So we've learned some new words in the educational world this year in this pandemic, and that's synchronous and asynchronous activities. So synchronous means that everybody's online learning together, and asynchronous is that time for students to take some of that learning and do that in independent time and do some of that time alone. Once again, that's been another conversation that we've had a lot of talk with principals. What's the right amount? What's the right amount per age of the child? What should we be expecting? How do we make sure that there's that right balance so we don't have kids on Zoom 8 hours a day? I know many times I do that as an adult, and it's really hard even for me to be able to stay focused through those many hours of Zoom. So Mickey, that's another piece of that asynchronous and synchronous learning that our principals are really working through with their teachers to try to make sure that we're delivering the right amount and the right activities. So that's some fine tuning that I know buildings have been doing to make sure that that learning online is as productive and positive and engaging as we can make it.
Thanks so much, Mary Kay. We appreciate your time tonight. I believe that Amy Wineland is on the call, and so we had some questions about public health related questions. I was just wondering if Amy was available to come on and answer some of those questions. Awesome. Hi, Amy. So, we're so grateful for your time and graciously coming on this call and for your partnership and then your expertise this evening. One of the first questions we had was mixing outside of school in either childcare or sports. Does that cause quarantines in school, or is that counterproductive to in-school mitigation strategies?
Thanks, Mickey, and thanks. I just want to say thanks so much to the leadership at Summit School District. I, as a parent and certainly as a public health director, I'm continue to be in awe of all the mitigation strategies that the school is implementing. And when I talk to my colleagues across the state, they can't believe the commitment that our school district has to make the school as safe as it is. And so to answer that question, when we look at what we're seeing across our county and the outbreaks that we're seeing, we are definitely, and the research actually shows this too, that extracurricular activities absolutely is a higher risk activity, certainly higher risk than being in school itself, when all of these layers of mitigation can be implemented and controlled in the way that they are being done so in our schools. And we've seen that. We've seen that in sports teams. We've seen some outbreaks on our sports teams. We've seen some outbreaks in other activities that have happened where multiple households are coming together. We are seeing more transmission happening in those situations if the guidance isn't being followed, or if masks aren't being worn, physical distancing isn't being kept in check. And so we definitely are seeing more outbreaks in that situation. So, with the new dial and the new level that we're going into, which is a higher risk and more severe situation, we're really trying to back away from those activities where you're mixing with multiple households in an area and an environment that isn't very well controlled.
Great, thanks so much, Amy. And so I just want to be respectful of everyone's time. We are over 6:30, but we'll go and ask Amy a couple more questions until 6:40, just so everyone knows why we're going over our time. Amy, the next question I have for you, are there false negatives or false positives with testing?
This is a really great question, and it kind of depends on the test that you're using. The tests that we have available in our community are that gold standard test that Drew just mentioned, both the nasal swab that we have at all of our community testing sites, as well as the cheek swab that is being done now at the middle school and hopefully will be implemented at all schools. Both these tests have a high specificity rate and reliability rate for detecting this virus. The amount of false negatives is really minimal, and there is a really, really low chance of getting a false positive on any of these tests that we're using in our community. If the virus is there, it will detect that on that day, unless there might be something wrong, maybe at the lab where the sample is being processed. Maybe it didn't get to the lab on time, or it's been sitting around for too long before it's been processed. Sometimes they're not able to run that lab with quality. And so we might have a negative in that instance. But the good news is we're getting test turnaround times of the next day, but within 24 to 48 hours with all of our testing sites. And so we're able to get those results really quickly. And it's really important that everyone get tested, especially if symptoms are happening immediately, so that we can quickly identify those positive cases.
Great, thank you so much, Amy. Another question is, can you explain the reasoning or rationale behind the doctor's note and the negative test in R3 guidance?
Yeah, so in our level orange and now as we move into the level red, they are requiring the doctor's note for return to school. And that's just an additional layer of protection when we have widespread community transmission. And that's where we are right now with being above 350,000 per 100,000 cases. We definitely have that extra layer. Now, what's also important to understand is that the school guidance that is coming out of CDPHE is reviewed on a monthly basis. And so that gets updated. It'll be updated again in December as we learn more about the virus and how it can be best controlled within the school environment. But we are in the level of red, and the reason for that is just an extra mitigation effort to make sure that what we're seeing isn't COVID, to get that extra validation from a physician or healthcare provider. Doesn't need to be a doctor, certainly. But what's really important is that what happens is it can easily affect the cohort or the class that your child might be in, which is why we really need you to get a test right away if symptoms are occurring, as well as making an appointment for a telehealth visit with a provider. We know that those who don't have insurance or who don't have insurance that will cover a doctor's visit, the care clinic or school-based health is available for those visits. And I do know that they have extra appointments available just for this reason, because they know that this is a component now of our outbreak guidance. And so we really do need to make sure that families who are getting tested, whose scholars are getting tested, to make sure that in addition to that, they're making that doctor's appointment for the next day or so, so that it doesn't interrupt the learning, in-person learning for the rest of the cohort.
Great, thanks so much for that clarification, Amy. Another question here is, if my child is quarantined, do I also need to quarantine?
That's a great question, and that's one we get all the time, not just within school, but within places of work as well. And the answer to that is no. If your child has been or has had an exposure and is in quarantine, that does not mean that you or any other household member needs to quarantine. Although if your child is needing childcare, you might need to stay home and care for your child, of course. But unless your child comes down with symptoms, and in which point they need to be tested right away, you are not at risk for also contracting the virus if that is what ends up happening.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Another question here is, if my child is, a follow-up one, similar, if my child is quarantined, should our family get tested or should my child get tested?
That's another question that we get quite a bit. So what's important to understand is that there is asymptomatic spread of this virus. That means that you can have the virus and not have any symptoms. So what we end up doing in our contact tracing team and working with the school district and in the folks that are in the classrooms and cohorts that are quarantined, we do recommend, if there has been an exposure, that people get tested on day 7 of their quarantine if they have not developed any symptoms. So yes, we would recommend that anybody in quarantine by day 7 get a test. It's more likely to show up at that time in asymptomatic individuals. But again, unless that test comes back positive, there's no need for the household to get tested. Although right now, given the increased capability we have for community testing, including our site in Silverthorne, which is a drive-through site, we can test, have the capability to test about 800 people every day of the week. And so we really are encouraging everyone to get tested, but it's not necessary that they get tested if it's their child that's in quarantine, unless they come back positive.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Amy, for your time tonight and for your
Of course.
expertise and joining us. We really appreciate the partnership with Public Health. And just so all families know, we're continuing to engage in conversations with Public Health almost daily. So we're continuing to review the new guidance and the new state dial and what that means for schools. So we're continuing to work through the intricacies with Public Health on what the new dial framework and the new level mean for our community and for our schools. So thank you so much, Amy. We really appreciate your time tonight. And thank you to everybody who joined us this evening. We really appreciate you all joining us here. Again, if your question was not answered this evening, please go ahead and enter it into the chat, and we'll collect all those and answer them in a frequently asked questions document, and we'll post those on the district website. We'll also post the recording of tonight's town hall as well as the presentation, so you can review that at a later time if you wish. We would like to invite all families to the board meeting tomorrow evening at 5 p.m. And as we continue to work through this week, and as we stated in Monday's letter, that we will communicate any additional information by Monday, November 23rd. So this is the conclusion of our town hall. Thank you all for being here. Enter any of your last questions in the chat and have a wonderful evening. Thank you.